Can everyone see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, it looks good.
Cool. Welcome back to the Azure podcast. Today is the 25th of February on 2021, and this is episode number 367, talking about enterprise scale landing zones with our very special guests, Rob Kuehfus and Jeff Mitchell. On Teams with me today, we have myself, Cynthia, Kale, Sujit, and of course, both of our special guests, Rob and Jeff. Before we get to them, we have a couple updates to share as usual. Kale, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I got 3 of them here to share, and I'll get through these quickly. So the first one is a blog post around demystifying cloud economics, which sounds super awesome. But basically, it's a really nice article kind of writing up about, when you start working with the cloud or as you're in the cloud, how does the cost structures change? I'm sure a lot of people who have been using the cloud are aware of the models that we do there, where there's less CapEx and things like that when you move to the cloud. But this is talking even a little bit deeper onto things like, some of the work that we do, and I mention these a lot on the podcast around cost analysis, your idle capacity, or things where you could cut back. A lot of work that we do around that, and how you can, look at your predictable versus unpredictable stuff. Look at your different kind of like spot VMs, reservations, all the different kind of things that go into the economics of running stuff in the cloud. And so super cool article, lots of like links out there to like much deeper information about this. And I think it's super cool for people interested in their cloud spend. Along with the same thing around economics is a good article around the e-commerce addition or announcement we've made here around PCI 3DS, they call it, which is this 3 domain secure compliance model with PCI, which is seems to be relatively unique in the industry. I'm not like a super PCI lawyer type thing on this, but if there's others here that could talk about that, it's the around the privacy in the payment card industry. This is a standard that's seems to be a quite hard bar to get, and there's essentially, you can see all the details. You can download our all the matrices, the white paper, all the stuff around the compliance that it takes to go into being certified as 3DS with PCI. Sujit, did you have something on that?
Yeah. So PCI applies to almost any company that takes credit cards, which pretty much is anybody, right? Including, financial services, obviously, insurance industry, and most retailers. And in order for them to process credit cards, their infrastructure has to be PCI compliant. Otherwise, they get dinged by the credit card provider. They charge exorbitant rates and things like that. So in order for them to accept credit cards and, like things like Amex and even more fussy about these things, they have to make sure that their infrastructure and their applications are PCI compliant. Now, my Azure will provide PCI compliant infrastructure, but when you put your application on top of that, then you have to take additional care to make sure your application is PCI compliant as well. So there's multiple layers involved there, but this is a good start.
Yeah, fun fact from a previous life I had before Microsoft. This is back in the early days of taking credit cards on the internet. The PCI stuff, when it first came out, and this was years back, I remember being told by our legal team at the company I work for, we cannot store that 3-digit security code and the credit card number in the same database. If that ever happens, we're done, right? Because MasterCard and Visa will be you are not accepting credit cards anymore, and so it's just interesting history there. The last one I have here is around, that's more technical, is around quota management, which is really cool. So there's a new, it's new to me. I don't know how early this has come out, but I think in January 2019, they announced the GA of this, the Azure Quota API. So for those who are aware, in your Azure subscription, by default, there's some quotas set up there, and then you can change them to basically allow more of, different VM sizes or different SKUs of products that are in Azure. And basically, you can open a support ticket to raise them if you need to raise the, different quotas you have up there. This is an API that allows you to do that without having to go into the GUI and open a support ticket that way. So kind of cool for those who want to programmatically kind of control their quotas.
And over to you, Sujeet.
Yep, that is one that I have. I mean, and I haven't put a couple of them, but they're both related, so I'll cover them in one shot here. Evan, unfortunately, isn't here today. So Azure, the Defender service in Azure App Services, there's actually something called Azure Defender that's part of it. And one of the things that they've introduced now is dangling DNS protection. What this means is if you have an Azure service and you pointed your DNS service, you have a subdomain that points to it. Now, let's say you decommission your Azure service, right? Maybe you take it down, but you forgot to get rid of the DNS pointer. That can result in somebody trying to take over your DNS subdomain. It's called the DNS takeover. And so to prevent that, when you shut down your Azure service, your app service, Azure Defender will come in and remind you that, hey, you have this pointer here. You really want to clean it up so that nobody can take over that subdomain. And so that's now built into the dangling DNS protection is now built into the app service. Cynthia?
Thanks, Jeet. And then I have one that Microsoft is planning to establish our first data center region in Indonesia. And that will be empowering a total of 24 million Indonesians by the end of 2021. And now over to our special guest. Rob, can you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do at Microsoft. And then after you're done, Jeff, could you also go next?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm Rob Kuehfus, and I lead our worldwide customer success Azure-enabled tech strategy team. And I realize that that's kind of a mouthful, but what it really means is that my team looks for solutions we can build that are aligned to the cloud adoption framework and the well-architected framework to help our customers be successful in Azure.
Yeah, and I'm Jeff Mitchell. I work on that team, the customer success apps and infrastructure enabled tech team. And I focus primarily on the cloud adoption framework when we talk about enabling our customers, right? So there's the well-architected framework and the cloud adoption framework, and that's how we get our customers started. So glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
So we've heard a lot about enterprise scale landing zones. What is that and why should I care?
Okay, so enterprise scale landing zones is the official definition would be it's an architectural approach to construct and operationalize your landing zones at scale that's aligned to the Azure roadmap and of course located in the cloud adoption framework. And the important thing I always say when people ask me is scale. So what we've taken on with this is a way to basically provide a architecture that also comes with a bunch of reference implementations to really help you put you on solid footing to scale out your environment as you grow in Azure.
Hey, Rob, when I think of landing zone, what comes to mind to me is where I let my drone drop down on a particular spot in my backyard. What exactly is a landing zone? I mean, it's not clear to me what that is in the sense of Azure.
Yeah, so it's not as cool as a landing zone in Mars that they just recently landed on, but I still think we have a lot there to offer as far as coolness. In our case, you think of the landing zone as all the right plumbing that's been put in place for you to actually be successful with your workloads. So for example, if you're going to go ahead and do a retail application, you would need a lot of foundational pieces in place that has, that allows you to be successful and to be able to actually run it in production. So for example, we would go ahead and make sure that we've wired up the network and the backups and all your centralized logging. And we would go ahead and make sure that if you were looking for disaster recovery, that was taken care of as well. So all the things that would be that plumbing. So all you need to focus on then is just the workloads and just putting them in the right place. And then all the other things will happen and be wired up.
Yeah. Rob, just to back up like 1 second for our listeners who might not be familiar, maybe you mentioned something there, the cloud adoption framework. What is that? And where can our customers find info about it and why should I care about it?
So the cloud adoption framework is our framework that helps you align your business, people and technology strategy together in this single framework to help you be successful long term in Azure. It's got a number of different methodologies that you would look at, and as you kind of work through the cloud adoption framework, you would go from an initial strategy plan all the way to some sort of adopt, govern, and manage as you work your way through it. This is all, of course, readily available, of course, on Microsoft's website, and we'll make sure that we give you and post the URL for you.
So I can think of this as like, I'm a business. I want to use Azure to run some of my workload or all of my workload, whether they be applications, some sort of compute that I have, or something like this. I can see this as like a guidance that will help me make the right decisions there and make sure that I'm following, common patterns and things like that. Is that the way I should think about it?
Well, a couple different things. Like for the cloud adoption framework, absolutely, it's fantastic guidance to put you on the right path for success. When we specifically talk about enterprise scale, there's a little bit of a difference there, because we try to say that it is proven and prescriptive guidance. So you could think of it as Microsoft has formed an opinion on what must be true to have success when you build out your landing zones. And the enterprise scale really is that architecture and reference implementations that help you actually build it out.
What is the experience like interacting with these content within enterprise scale landing zone? Do we get just documentation, or are there actual scripts or actual templates that we can get started with?
I'll let Jeff chime in on that one.
That's a great question. So we've really constructed, and there's two sets of documentation, right? The first is architecture and the architectural design. So this is meant to help you understand what are the considerations for your landing zone, and then what are the recommendations that we as Microsoft are making. And we've divided those up into 8 different areas. So we start at the top with understanding your Azure Active Directory tenant, and then work our way down to understanding more complex topics like your networking, your platform automation and DevOps approach, right? And so that guidance helps you with building out your design architecture for your landing zone. And then we also have a reference implementation. So the reference implementation is an example that of code that's in a GitHub repo, enterprise scale GitHub repo, that a customer can deploy into their Azure tenant, and then get the model of enterprise scale, the management group structure, the deployment at the tenant level, and the policies for governing that environment. And so in 2 ways, we found that with our customers, it's one thing to give them the information and the recommendations, but it's another thing to show them an example of how to be successful and an example of what that model looks like, right? So that helps the customer get started with adopting their own cloud operations model.
And when we talk about these, are we just talking about net new, like greenfield? What if I've started in Azure already, and then how do I backpedal so that I fulfill all these prescriptive practices?
Yeah, I've already started. Are you telling me I have to start all over, right? Yeah. So with enterprise scale, you can deploy into an environment that already has Azure resources. So in that way, you can either deploy new applications that have a new lifecycle into the enterprise scale landing zone and match, so you don't have to create a whole new lifecycle for managing pre-existing resources in Azure. You can just work into this model, this new management model with enterprise scale. Second thing is, within we're still talking about an Azure tenant construct, right? So moving resources between resource groups or moving resources between subscriptions is just based upon the roles that were assigned. So that can be planned and managed and moved in order to meet the customer's requirements to adopt enterprise scale. And then the third thing is, like, these pre-existing resources that you have, if you are deploying them as infrastructure as code, if you are following change management process, then you could simply deploy those resources into the new management group or subscription structure within enterprise scale. So we work with customers, I'd say more so, that already have resources in Azure than those who are net new and greenfield, but it certainly helps accelerate that process for our greenfield customers.
And just to extend on what Cynthia was asking, are these in the form of like ARM templates or Terraform scripts? Like, how do we actually deploy this stuff, or do we provide like a guidance and then customers have to create their own versions of those scripts?
all of the examples that we have are in ARM templates in the GitHub repo, so you can customize them. We have a very great guide that actually, it has in the Azure click to deploy button. So when you click on that, you can go through and actually use the UI to deploy your base set of management groups and the reference implementation for enterprise scale. But we also have third party. So we have a Terraform module that is in the registry, CAF enterprise scale, that's available. And so we try to meet the customer in many places where they either already have a third party or ARM. So what we have available today is the ARM templates and Terraform, and it's all based upon the Azure Resource Manager tooling within Azure, because we're starting at that tenant level deployment. So.
Yeah, one question I had too, Jeff and Rob, if I am an enterprise who maybe I already have some experience with Azure in certain areas, but like I'm getting into things like, let's take for instance BCDR, disaster recovery type stuff. Is this set up in such a way, these landing zones, so that I can kind of like pinpoint stuff like that, where I'm like, I don't really understand what Microsoft's like thoughts are or recommendations around BCDR? Can I come in at like a pinpoint, or do I have to like consume it at a high level like a bunch of other stuff?
Well, of course, you can zero in directly on the particular area that you're most concerned and focused in. I mean, whenever somebody goes ahead and deploys and implements enterprise scale for their environment, they're always going to go on a journey and then really kind of try to strive towards what we call like a North Star, getting to the full deployment of enterprise scale. But they're going to take it in bits and pieces as they go. One of the things we do is, after you go through and basically bootstrap your tenant for enterprise scale, which Jeff mentioned, we have a deploy button where you can then go into a very nice, robust, portal-based experience that walks you through the full deployment. You can decide what things you want to check off and decide, do your deployment. And then what you have, though, is a lot of deploy if not exist policies. And we put those at the very top. So in what we call like your root tenant management group. And those policies then can be assigned throughout the rest of the hierarchy and in the landing zone. So if you were interested in BCDR, for example, those policies are probably one that you would want to say, all right, let's make sure those are assigned, because that's the scenario I'm truly interested at this moment. And as you work through it, you're going to assign more and more of these policies. Of course, depending on how you configured the user, the UX when you went through and did your initial deployment, you may have toggled most of the things off to start. And maybe you just said, let's just do DR. And those are the ones that got assigned up, from your initial deployment.
And then just for our listener, I think BCDR is business continuity and disaster recovery. Is that accurate?
Got it.
Yes.
Awesome. I was like going through like, what is BCDR? I know what
Well,
DR is. But what is BC?
Microsoft with our acronyms, right? We're loaded with them.
Usually they're 3 letters, though.
Yeah. So Rob and Jeff, how did you guys come up with these set of baseline recommendations, right? Like, did you guys poll customers? Did you go out to the field and ask your CSAs, hey, what are you seeing out there? Like, how'd you come up with this master list, so to speak?
That's an excellent. That's a fantastic question. And the what we basically did is we were starting to look across a lot of our customer CSA deployments. And one of the things we noticed is, why does it take 5 or 6 months before we get to a production workload running in a customer environment? And if we could really understand what every CSA is going through, how can we shorten that amount of time and basically build a better foundation for our customers, where they can have something that maybe has a regulatory or compliance need, and they can feel very confident that they can put that in Azure faster. So when we really analyzed that, we looked across a lot of our strategic customers, our majors, we talked to partners, and we built a set of basically opinions or prescriptive guidance that basically said, if you do these things, we know this will work. It is proven. And the customers were successful doing this. And so that's kind of how we started this, is by building that list. And then, of course, before we went any further than that, we really wanted to work with the engineering teams to make sure that any of the guidance that we wanted to go forward with was something that they agreed to and they were aligned with, and that made sense in their roadmap as well. So we kind of brought it all together. And then what the output of that was the enterprise scale architecture.
Yeah, and along with that, I think you'd mentioned this earlier, but maybe just to clarify, this is like open source. And what I mean by that is like nothing's perfect, right? So stuff gets put out there, whether they be templates or even documentation. Like, can customers, partners, all the people contribute back to this thing? Like, how does that work? You know?
That is our full intention, is that we have lots of different teams contribute to this, not just within Microsoft, but also partners, customers that want to contribute to this. We have it running in GitHub right now. That's where the reference implementations are. Anyone can, of course, we encourage it to please clone it. Try it out in your environment. If you have any feedback, please, do pull requests back to the main branch.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So as someone that, say, I want to start following and making sure that my enterprise is following all these prescriptive opinions, is there a way that I can track my progress, or like to check, oh, I'm actually doing all the things that Microsoft thinks is right to do? Or is it more of like I consume the information and then I'm kind of on my own after that?
Yeah. Jeff has been kind of working on that problem, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a couple of different things. The first thing is the reference implementation will build out a great construct that's going to get you to the point where you have your policies in place and you have the constructs for your subscriptions. So that's really a majority of the action items are making sure that you've got a good construct for managing your subscriptions. What comes next is how you're going to make key decisions about your network, your identity, and those what we call critical design areas that come next, the 8 that we mentioned earlier. So starting with the implementation that is working from the GitHub, you're going to get about halfway there. Now, they're key decisions. Not every customer implementation of enterprise scale is exactly the same. Some of our customers will use virtual WAN for their network. Some will use a hub and spoke model for their virtual network, and some won't connect their network at all to any type of corporate network, right? So those decisions make it hard for us to say, like, this is the explicit design, right? But you can go through and you can make decisions that will lead you to your design from the documentation that's public in the Cloud Adoption Framework. What we are looking next month to release is going to be a guide to help you with that process. So we'll have a checklist that you can use, as well as we'll have a questionnaire that you can assess where you should start and where you should invest. And we're looking really forward to that'll be posted on the Cloud Adoption Framework, and it'll come out with our public documentations for enterprise scale. So definitely looking forward to getting the new content out there, as well as that's how we kind of help customers with what we have today.
Do you have any more questions for Rob and Jeff before we let them go?
I know this has been great. How quickly do you guys turn around issues on the GitHub repo?
Well, I would say, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, we address within 24 hours. We'll acknowledge, what issue has been posted there, and then also, everything is debuggable as well. So if you've got anything that you need that you find that you can debug and you can post to us and give us that information, we're definitely want to get that feedback, as well as the CAF Terraform that we have. That is also a GitHub repo where people can contribute and provide feedback on as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Cynthia, you want to close it out?
Yeah. Rob and Jeff, I'll definitely get some links from you both regarding both Cloud Adoption Framework or Enterprise Scale Landing Zone specific ones. And thank you both so much on coming on the show.
Love it. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.